Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to our Island Visa Workshop training webinar. We're going to be talking about the financial evidence requirements needed for student visa applications for Ireland, and it's going to be led by Alistair Graham, who's our visa clients officer. So I'm just going to pass straight to him. We'll do the recording as usual and send you the recording and slides after the webinar.
Thanks so much, Flora. So thanks all for coming today. So just to very briefly go over what we're going to be covering, we're going to be looking at, as Laura said, financial requirements, but we're also going to be taking a look at some reasons for refusals we've been seeing trending recently and sort of ways to avoid them. So it will be very financial evidence-based workshop, a recap over the requirements and reasons for refusal. So to begin with, we'll jump straight into it and just start with the very basics of what we need to see for finances. So what we need to see is basically the students got enough funds to support their stay in Ireland. And what this needs to be is the actual living costs, which is 10,000 per year. And then they need to show the course fees as well. We'll go into the summary form a bit later. And what is very important as we will proceed with this is the source of funds being clear and traceable. So there must be a 6-month bank statement provided, and it needs to be very, very apparent where all the transactions have come from. So if we just continue. So what's the minimum amount that a visa nationals need to show on their bank statement? So the answer to that question, unfortunately, is that it does depend. So a lot of questions that we commonly get are how can the student show as sort of little on the bank statement as possible and be able to submit it. So what they need when we talk about immediate and ready access funds. So immediate access funds are specifically the first year of course fees and 10,000 euros a year for living costs, as I've mentioned before. So they need to have immediate access to this. It needs to be on the bank statement, and there's no way around this. So ready access is a little bit different. Ready access is talking about future years of the course. So for example, let's say it's a 4-year course. There needs to be ready access to the further 3 years of tuition fees and living costs. What this means is you do not necessarily need to have all the funds for the course fees and living costs for all 4 years of a 4-year program. However, you do need to be able to clearly show how you're going to get that money and where it's going to come from. So this is normally shown with something like income. So if the sponsor's got a high enough income, then they can go to the Irish Visa Authority and say, look, I'm going to have enough money in the future to meet the course fee requirements and living costs as they're met. This could also be sale of an asset. For example, if they own multiple houses and they're selling one of the houses and that's valued enough to cover future years of the course, that would be considered as well. However, as I've said previously, with immediate access, there's no way around this. It has to have the first year living costs, which is 10,000 euros, and the first year course fees. You will obviously, from the course fees, deduct however much has already been paid of the course fees. We'll cover this a little bit more in detail when we get to the financial summary form. But these are the two important terms to remember. So immediate access and ready access. Immediate access, no way around. You must have in the bank the course fees and living costs. Ready access, you need to be able to, if you can't show them immediately, then you need to be able to show that you'll have access to them in the future. And it needs to be proven with either income or something like an asset sale, for example. So source of funds, which we'll get onto more in a bit, needs to be very clear and traceable. And the applicant will need to provide a 6-month bank statement. Needs to be up to date, showing what money's been paid in and out of the account. And this needs to be submitted no matter what, basically. Bank statements have to be in headed paper. Internet printouts can be accepted if it's been notarized by the bank and the accompanying letter from the bank confirming its authenticity. I would say, as a rule of thumb, pretty much always, if you're using a bank statement, then there should be an accompanying letter from the bank as well, sort of confirming details like the account number and age of the account. That should just be added in there as well. And really important, any large or irregular deposits must be explained. So as we'll go on to talk about, this, in my opinion, with regards to finance-related refusals, is the number one reason we'll see is that it will be a large deposit that's not explained very well. Because it's not enough, for example, to show 20,000 euros on one day being put into the account. It needs to be really clear where that's come from. So there needs to be a letter from the bank as well, if it's a fixed deposit account being used, confirming that the funds can be taken out at any point. That's really important as well. So just keep that in mind. So with regards to sponsors, so generally we would advise students to use direct blood relatives, so parents, sometimes even aunts and uncles. However, when it gets to the point where family friends are going to be used, or aunts and uncles, it needs to be really clearly justified why the parents can't sponsor the student. We have had issues in the past where it's not very clear from the Irish Visa Authority side of things, where they will say, why is the aunt and uncle being the sponsor? Why is it not the parent? So that just needs to be very clearly highlighted to them. It can be highlighted in the financial consent letter. It can be highlighted in a number of different ways, but it's just very important that it's clear why this is the case. So there needs to be clear details of the financial support that's going to be provided and the amount of support that's going to be provided. So they need to be able to demonstrate evidence to do with like businesses as well and other income, but we'll get to that a bit more shortly. So, as we've alluded to already, large lump sum transactions of a few thousand euros or higher needs explaining. This needs to be a written explanation, explain the specific transactions and where it's come from with attached evidence. So what do we mean by this? Well, the most effective and common form of lump sum transaction evidence, I would say, is just simply an accompanying letter with the bank statement, and you just highlight the transaction, the date the transaction occurred that you're talking about, and then say, this is where this money has come from, very clearly. And then you attach evidence as well, such as like transfer receipts, for example, or evidence of like a house sale, if it's from a house sale, or from salary. You need an employment letter showing income. So it's extremely important that this is explained well. And as stated in the bottom there, the applicant could have €1 million in their bank statement, but if they can't explain where it's come from, they will get a refusal. It's so important, because we've seen time and time again, it can happen, where students will have a high amount of money in their bank, but they haven't explained it well, and that can lead to a refusal. It is not enough to just have the mentality that they need to have X amount of money. It needs to be very clear that actually they need to show where that money's come from. So this is kind of a rough example, with just fictional account numbers and everything, as to how you would explain lump sum transactions. So this is a brief letter where it basically sort of says that who they are, and explaining exactly about the income at the beginning, and then highlighting specific transactions that have been made. So there's more than one here, there's a couple, and then it will discuss the history of it, which accounts it's come from and why. So we can see here it's sort of split into 3 parts, where it says where the money's come from, the transactions themselves, exactly how much, which accounts, where they've come from, and the purpose of the transaction. That's really important. So it explains well here why they've done the lump sum transaction and where it's come from, and it just highlights everything very, very clearly, and that's exactly the kind of format that you want. The last thing you want is it to just leave it and not explain it, because the student will get a refusal if it's not explained. So it's very, very important to just highlight it. I think a letter is the most effective format, but obviously it's very important that it is time consuming, but every single transaction that's over a few thousand, that's like an irregular lump sum, that needs to be explained clearly. Okay, so source of funds. So what do we mean by source of funds? Well, we're talking, it's a linked to big lump sum transactions, but it's more to do with the sponsor's income, where the money's come from. So how can the student show source of funds? Well, there's two common ways. Well, two different categories of which you'd be explaining. So we'll say if they're self-employed, the first thing they need to have is registration documents for the company showing that they're the owner. If it's a business account that's being used, they need to show that the sponsor is the sole authorizer of the account and prove they're owner of the company. If they want to use a business account, the problem that can come up is that multiple people have access to this business account and use it. So it needs to be super clear that the sponsor is the sole authorizer and that they own the company and that they can do what they want with the funds. The third one, and I would highly advise, is the strongest, definitely one of the strongest forms of evidence, is an independent audit showing cash flow. Because what that does then is it shows the profit that business is making and exactly how much is being taken home as pay and not being put back into the business. Because what the Irish Visa Authority will do is they'll basically say, look, your business is making this amount of money a year. However, how much of this is actually being taken away and how much of it is going back into the business? And if it can't be shown, then that's a problem, because they might not take that evidence very seriously, because they'll assume that a lot of it will be tied up in running costs and other costs of the business. So the best thing I would say is a combination where the sponsor is self-employed is an independent audit into the company, but also evidence showing of the company's cash flow, how much is going back to the sponsor. That's really important. And if you can show those two things, then that is absolutely fine. There is not an issue. So it's a bit different when the sponsor is employed with the company. In some ways, it's a bit easier because there's less documents that need to be provided. So it's very simply an employment reference letter or a job offer letter. This letter basically needs to say when they've started working at the company and what their salary is. So there also will need to be roughly 3 months of pay slips is what we advise. Can be more, it's not a problem, but the last 3 months at least, showing exactly how much they've been paid. And that will be considered when discussing elements of, like we talked about before, ready access funds for the future and how they're going to be able to cover future costs of the course. In most students' cases, they are going to need to be able to show that they're going to have the money in the future, because they're not going to have the money in the bank for a 4-year program and living costs already. So this is where it's really important for both elements, whether it's the sponsor self-employed, whether they're employed with a company. It's really important to show where this money is coming from, and how much they're getting. So what don't we accept as evidence of finances? So firstly, credit cards cannot be accepted, I hope for obvious reasons, as it's not showing exactly how much they've got, it's just showing a credit card debt effectively. So that cannot be used at all. Large lump sums into the account that aren't explained, as we've already discussed quite a bit now, that is not enough and will not be accepted. The third one here, a common form of evidence that sometimes students will try to submit, but it's really important they don't, is an affidavit from the sponsor stating how much they earn. This is not treated as evidence from the Irish Visa Authority, because they will argue that the student can put whatever they want on there effectively, and it's not necessarily well regulated in that sense. So what's really important is that there's actual income evidence of how much they're making, not just a piece of paper from the student saying they make a set amount of money. So that's very, very important to think about. And as we've already talked about, no matter how much cash is on the bank statement, if it can't be explained, there will be a visa refusal. So just always keep that in mind. Um, so here's just a list of the three main documents we need to start with so we can start assessing an FE case, because I'm sure what we want to do, of course, is assess this as quickly as possible. And in order to do that, if these three documents can be available when you are ready for us to start looking at a student's case, that will speed up the process significantly. So I can't stress how important it is that these three are provided. So that is a financial summary form, which provides a summary of the student's finances, which we'll go on to look at shortly. A bank statement showing 6 months of transactions, and the source of funds for the student, which you've already talked a fair bit about. So for those three elements, that's what we're going to need to see. And then we can go from there and give you a very, very good set of details as to what the students needs and where they're at. The financial summary form is incredibly important. It's filled in well because in a lot of cases, this is the first document the caseworker will look at, and it gives them an overview of the student's financial situation. And it forms a lot of what they're going to be looking for in quite often a heavy bundle of documents that are provided. So it's really important that this is filled in correctly. So let's go on to, so this is a blank template of the first section, immediate access finances, of the summary form. By the way, just the reason it says 2 on there is technically the very first section is just personal details. I haven't included that because I don't see the need to go over that in this session, but it's very basic. It's just putting in details like the student's address, their name, etc. So very basic details. So the second part is talking about immediate access finances. So this, if you remember from the beginning, is talking about the first year of course fees, and no matter what, they need to show this on the bank statement. So it's the course fees plus living costs, and any scholarships deducted, and any fees paid are deducted. So when we look at section 2.1, that's what that's talking about. So it's looking at the fees paid and subtracting that from the fees required, as well as the scholarship. So any fee payments are listed there as well. So there'll be the date of the payment, how much has been paid in total, and then it'll be sort of given as a list of different transactions if there's more than one. And the details of the bank used to make the payment will be given, and that's very important. And then 2.2, this one, we do see the mistake sometimes, but it's very, very important. It's just simply 10,000. It's always going to be 10,000. Cost of living will be 10,000 a year. So they just need to put 10,000 in this section here. For immediate access, it will basically have the course fees outstanding, plus the cost of living, and then they'll enter the total there. So that's really important. And then what they'll do here is declare their finances for year one. So what this is will basically be is the bank statement we were talking about. So the 6-month bank statement, they'll put that there and say how much is on the account. So sometimes the student might have everything covered for first year all the way through to their 4th year, or if they're, for example, a master's student, for their first year through to the 2nd year. However, what's really important is sometimes they don't, and if they don't, obviously they need to show the immediate access no matter what, but we're talking about ready access. They'll have to demonstrate that with subsequent income. So here's an example here of a student that's basically got their fees required, fees paid, and deducted a scholarship. So they've got no outstanding fees left to pay. So that in this case, they simply just need to show the living costs. And here they've put how much they've paid, the date of the payment, and they've put the cost of living requirement as 10,000 as well. And then here we've got the total immediate access requirement. So that's 10,000. The reason that's 10,000 is because they've paid full fees already. So then at that point, all they need to show is just a 10,000 living cost immediate access. But they have here a 79,000 euro account. So as we'll see, they might have enough to actually cover future years of the program. So now we'll go on to ready access. So this is where they fill in all their information to do with ready access funds. and that they need to have the ability to fund each additional year. So what's really important is that they put the total length of the course, total additional fees required. So this is concerning years 2 and above. So they don't need to put the total fees, including the first year they've done previously. The ready access is just talking about future years of the course. So, for example, if it's a if it's a 4-year program, you're only worrying about the further 3 years. So years 2, 2, 3, and 4. So they'll put their scholarship as well. So the cumulative total, and total cost of living requirements. Now, I am aware in some situations, because students are obviously doing the foundation, they won't necessarily be fully aware of the exact total of their course fees for all 4 years of the course going forward. What they need to do in that situation is put a rough ballpark. So by that I mean a rough estimate based on the foundation costs as to how much it's actually going to be. It's not the end of the world if it's slightly out by a little bit, but it basically just needs to really be shown that they've thought about it and it's a reasonable number being provided. If it's an absolutely ridiculously low number being given, then that's going to be a problem. It needs to be reasonable. Oh, hello. I think I might have gone there. Sorry, I think my network cut off. Just give me one moment.
We can see it okay now.
Yep, can
Otherwise.
see everything okay? Perfect. Yeah, sorry about that. I think my network cut out slightly. Anyway, so as I was saying, what we need to have here is obviously future years of the program being taken into account, and any additional funds that aren't covered by the finances need to be declared here. So this is an extremely important section, 3.2, and it's the one I would argue we see the most mistakes on. And what this is where when the student doesn't have enough for the ready access requirements, so from years, for example, let's say a 4-year program from years 2 to 4, how they're going to get that money and where it's going to come from. So they might say, well, I'm going to get it from income. They might say they're going to get it from savings. Sorry, I've gone ahead there. Might be from savings. And they've got additional savings they haven't shown. Could be from income, could be from an asset sale. So it needs to be really clear where this money is going to come from. That's incredibly important. So if 3.2 is not filled in well, the student can get a refusal, because if they go, well, the student meets the immediate access, but they're not meeting the ready access because they don't have enough money for future years of the program, this is where you show where the student's going to get it from. So that's incredibly important. So in this example here, so going on the one, this is the same example as previously. What they need to do is demonstrate that they've got enough sorry, for the 3 years. So they've got the total additional requirements and scholarship, as well as the future cost of living. So there's a further 3 years of the course. Additionally, they can put further income that they've got, for example, which the student's done here. In this situation, they don't necessarily need to, purely because they have enough money already for future future years of the course. But it is a lot more important when they don't meet this requirement. So we'll now go into evidence accounting for study gaps. So a full account statement needs to be provided for study history. This includes periods of time until the application to study is going to be taking place. Sorry, I've got a really sore voice today. I am struggling. So they must give full details of employment history as well. That's really important. So the longer the gap, the more of a problem there will be. We always assess study gaps on a case-by-case basis, but this has a chance to be explained clearly in the personal statement. So in an ideal world, we want to see letters of employment showing basically from start to end and their duties and what they were doing. What's especially good is where it's being related to the intended program. So to recap that, shorter the study gap, the better. But if it's a long study gap, it needs to be really well explained, and we will assess that on a case-by-case basis as to the probability of success. So, how is the study gap explained? Well, we're on to now the personal statement. So if this is not clear, this can be another reason for refusal. So we're sort of moving a little bit away from finances towards another very important document. And I'd say the next most common reason for refusal if not done correctly, and that's the personal statement. So it should just be 1 page long and needs to show intent and interest. So it needs to explain elements like educational history, why they want to do the course, how the chosen course relates to their previous education. Needs to explain why they've chosen on-campus Ireland, and why Dublin. I'd say that's probably the second most important part, because we can see in the language of some of the refusal letters that they will say you haven't justified why you want to study Ireland specifically. So I think it's especially important where we have some students that do the foundation with us will want to go on to different countries potentially, and do a program there once they've done the foundation with us in Ireland, somewhere else in Europe. That's fine, but it needs to be really clear as to why they're choosing Ireland. That's incredibly important. So the need to study the course in Ireland, obviously, as I've just said, very important, and there needs to be specific reasons given for this. For example, the example given here is like the IT sector, an opportunity for career aspirations. There's, like we talked about before, the study gap must be clearly explained here. If time has been taken out for work or illness or anything like that, it needs to be explained well. There should be no empty periods of time between finishing school and the day of application. So I know there's sometimes confusion about what we mean when we say study gap. So so it's absolutely clear and there's no confusion. It simply means the gap between the last time in full-time education and the day they're basically applying for the visa. But the most important paragraph is where they clearly explain future aspirations and that they'll be returning home after their studies, as well as reasons why they're going to be doing this. And this is where strong ties to home country need to be demonstrated. So as some of you may be aware, some of the most common language on refusal letters, sometimes unfairly, it will be saying that there's not demonstrated strong enough ties to home country, which is a problem, in that how they demonstrate this. It needs to be very clearly stated on the personal statement, and this is the student's main chance to show this. So it's incredibly important that that's demonstrated well. So just to briefly summarize what I've just said, so the two main points to worry about, I would say, are why Ireland and strong ties to home country and future aspirations. Those two elements are definitely the most important. So here's a sort of brief checklist of things a student will need. So obviously their passport, letter of acceptance, academic evidence, English language evidence, and all the financial evidence documents we've gone over. So that's evidence of source of funds, bank statements, a birth certificate to show proof of relation, consent letter showing that they consent to the funds being used, evidence of fee payments, explanation for lump sum transactions, anything to do with guardianship agreements if the student's under 18 and they are biological parent, and obviously the application form and passport photos need to be up to date as well. And any refusal letters should also be provided. Just a quick note on refusal letters. It's really important that the student does declare them to the Irish Visa Authority, because we've seen, especially if it's another European refusal, so for in EU, basically, they will sometimes have access to this data. So we've seen it before where a student's not declared to us that they've got a visa refusal from somewhere in Europe. They've got the refusal, not told us, and then we get a refusal from Ireland saying they had this refusal and didn't declare it. It's from somewhere else in Europe. So that's just something to consider. Evidence accounting for study gap as well will be covered really by the personal statement, but that's just very important that the personal statement's strong to demonstrate this. So let's discuss briefly the common reasons for refusal for the last few intakes. I would say, to be honest, looking at ones that have come through now for January 26 as well, I'd say these also carry through to there as being the similar reasons that we see. So large study gap being poorly explained despite good finances, that can be a problem. You can have all the finances sorted, but as I've said, if the study gap's long, not explain what they've been doing, then that's going to be a big problem. Personal statement needing to be clearer and better articulated. That is important. It needs to be written well. It needs to, like we've talked about before, really clearly explain why Ireland and also what their plans are for the future. This is a third point that it is important to consider. Funds from third parties that are not parents, we have seen this, are not weighted as strongly as evidence of funds. So while you can still use them, the evidence for the reasoning, sorry, for using an aunt or uncle needs to be really strong. It needs to be really clearly explained why the parent's not being used. And they are definitely stricter, I would say, on the quality of evidence with aunts when it's a non-biological parent being used, and also who they are and the relation to the student. So it's really important that this is shown. So that's a very important point to consider. I would say the most common financial reason for refusal we see, as I've discussed recently, is the large lump sum deposits not being explained well. It needs to have detailed explanation for each of those large lump sum transactions in like a letter format, as best, like I said before, to make it as clear as possible for the caseworker. These are the transactions, these are the dates, and this is where the funds are from. Additionally, if they haven't demonstrated the need to study the course in Ireland, that is a real problem, and that's where the personal statement comes into this to show this. But that is a very common line that they'll put into the refusal letters, that they haven't demonstrated enough that they need to study the course there. So it's very important that it's clearly explained. With that brings me to the end of the presentation portion. So now we'll open up the floor to any questions anyone's got. So yeah, thank you very much.
Alistair. I'll just go through the questions. I'm just going to go back to the top to see what the first ones are. Okay, is it like the UK? The amount must stay above the required number and must not go below during the full 6 months, or is it like the USA where it can go up and down but stays within the required number at the end of the 6 months?
Okay, that's a great question. So it's not like the UK, no. So the UK has the 28-day rule, and that's where the funds need to be in the account for 28 consecutive days without going under the required value. So let's say they need to show £30,000. That means every single day of that 28 days, it can't go under that value, even if it's on day 27. So with Ireland, it's different. For the 6 months, it doesn't need to be in the account for all those 6 months. However, where you can run into problems, let's say it's an account that, like, for the first 5 months doesn't have much funds on it, and then finally on the last month, all the funds are added in a few big lump sums. That problem is that it needs to be really well explained, as stated previously. So it's not necessarily going to be an immediate refusal. It just means that it needs to be really well explained. So in answer to that question, no, it doesn't have to be in the account for the whole 6 months, but it looks a lot better if the amount's been consistent throughout the entire 6 months. That's a definite, like, stronger quality of a bank statement that's been provided. But I would say, if possible, try and make sure that it's not being left until the last few days of that 6 months for the funds to be added, because that will be a real problem, and it can look bad. It can sometimes be explained well, where if they've got, for example, other accounts and they say, look, these are my other accounts, I've just transferred this money to the account for the purposes of the visa, then that's fine. But then they'll also be asking, well, the money from your other accounts, where did that come from? But yeah, that answers that one, I think.
Thanks, Alistair. The financial summary form will be provided by whom?
So you can get the financial summary form on the Irish Visa Authority website. So it's on their list of documents where they effectively, and the link's also on this presentation, by the way. So the slides will be given out after, and you can go onto this and just find the link yourself. But if you look at the Irish Visa Authority website, the link is on there, and they basically provide you with that Word document, and you just have to fill it in and provide it with the application when it's submitted. So that's where you get that from.
Will visa officers consider prior gaps in education or employment?
So yeah, as we kind of talked about already a bit earlier, that's absolutely right. They will consider prior gaps in education and employment. It can be a real problem if it's not explained, and we assess on a case-by-case basis when the student's got a study gap, because it will depend on the overall profile and everything as to the probability of success. But I will say if it can be really well explained and evidence what they've been doing during this time, then it's not really going to be a problem. It's more of an issue if it's a significant period of time or it's not being well explained. So it wouldn't be good enough, for example, for it to be they were last in full-time education, let's say 2 years ago, wanting to study now, and they've got no answer for what they've been doing for the past 2 years. That's not going to work with the Irish Visa Authority.
Is a fixed deposit bank statement accepted?
Yep, so fixed deposit bank statements can be okay, but what's really important is just as the accompanying letter from the bank effectively saying that the funds can be withdrawn at any time, and obviously that they've been in the bank for the past 6 months. That's what's really important. But yes, it can be accepted.
Can sale of property, gold, or other assets be used as financial proof?
Okay, so when we talk about, for example, source of funds, so financial proof to talk about ready access. Remember, immediate access is for first year of course fees, and ready access for future years. So for future years of the program, absolutely. Sale of assets like a house or gold, that's absolutely fine if that's evidenced as to where the money in the accounts come from. The caveat I will say with that is, especially with a house sale, if it's the family home that's been shown to be sold, that's not going to be weighted very strongly, because they'll say, well, you're going to need to obviously buy another property to live in. If they've got more than one property or multiple properties, then it's a lot more strong. So they'd also want evidence of like all the properties they own, basically. So in that situation, I would advise a student to say, look, here's a family home, and here's this other property that we're planning on selling, and that's what will be valuable. And then it shows that very clearly where those funds have come from going into the account. But yeah, sale of assets as well, that's fine. I would say shares aren't really well accepted, obviously, because the value can go up or down. And saying they're going to sell shares in the future, it's kind of limited in terms of how it's accepted as evidence for that reason, because the value can go up or down. So that's just something very important to consider. So yes, that can be accepted as evidence of source of funds, but obviously just need to provide the bank statement and everything.
What is the typical format for a financial affidavit?
So kind of as stated before, we really shouldn't be using like the students should not be using affidavits to declare their finances. They should not be doing that because the Irish Visa Authority will not accept that as a form of evidence, because they'll just say, look, the student can put anything on there. Rightly or wrongly, that is their stance on it. So that's why we don't accept that being provided, because it doesn't really evidence exactly how much income they're getting. It's just them self-declaring, I have this amount of money, without any actual evidence. So it's important that that's not being provided to us as a form of evidence. What needs to be shown is the bank statement itself and just simply where the funds have come from. That's it.
Can you please brief us on the undertaking and cover letter?
The undertaking and cover letter. So I'm assuming by that we're talking about the personal statement as sort of reasoning for choosing the course. So sort of as talked about a bit already, we've got like the rough format early in this presentation, but what really important parts are: why they're wanting to study the program, why Ireland, that's extremely important, and also ties to their home country. So those three elements are incredibly important. And obviously the last one I would say is the most important, so strong ties to home country and that they will return in their study. Because in my opinion, when of the refusal letters I've seen, that's the number one line they will include in it is say that they haven't demonstrated sufficient ties to their home country. So that's where the personal statement is extremely important to explain this. And that's why it needs to be reviewed carefully what the student's putting on it. Because if it's not reading well, if it's not clear, then that's a real issue.
How are previous visa refusals, Ireland or other countries considered? I think it's something about the visa success rate that's also mentioned as a question as well in
Okay.
2025.
So how are previous refusals considered when we're considering if the student can study with us? So it does depend really on the nature of the refusal. So I would say Ireland are very strict. If it's a recent Ireland student visa refusal, it will have to really depend on the reasoning given. For example, if it's reasoning that's related to like fraudulent documents being provided, then it'll obviously be an immediate no from our side. Or if it's reasoning to do with non-disclosed visa refusals, that will likely also be an immediate no from our side. So it really does depend on the profile of the student, and we do assess them on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, so it also depends on the quantity. If it's a lot of visa refusals, then that can be an issue. However, if it's one sort of like, let's say like a generic US boilerplate refusal from like a fair few years ago, and the overall profile looks okay for the student, then we might actually be happy to move forward and consider them for the program. So that's how we'll look at it. But yeah, unfortunately, I can't give an answer other than it really just does depend on the nature of the visa refusal that's being provided.
Do you know the visa success rate in 2025 for Ireland?
For us, I don't know the specific success rate off the top of my head. No.
If an investment letter can be used as financial proof, can an investment letter be used?
Okay, so about so this will be related to source of funds. So it can't be used in place of like the bank statement or fixed deposit letter for showing you've got the funds for 6 months. So if you're saying you've got like investment for 6 months, that's not going to be accepted. It potentially can be considered on top of other things for like sort of showing a wider portfolio of like this is where my money's coming from. I have this amount of money in this share, but as I've sort of discussed before, the problem with that is they don't necessarily value that very highly because the value can go up or down, and that's why they'll sort of take a pause when considering it. We can have a look at it certainly, but that alone, I will say now, would not be sufficient. You need to have other documents as well, for example, showing income, or maybe like other asset sales as well. But it can be considered on top of other things as well. So that is something to consider.
In refusal letters, officers often mention insufficient documentation. How can applicants address or prevent this issue in their reapplication?
Okay, so when they're talking about that is a common line we'll see. So when they're talking about insufficient documentation, it will normally mean one of two things. It either means they haven't provided one of the documents that the Irish Visa Authority wants to see, or it will mean that one of the documents that's been provided isn't sufficient for a reason that they've given. So all I can say really is they need to make sure that everything that we've looked at with them and we've said that they're happy for them to go ahead and provide, they provide and don't skip out on any of those documents. That's really important. Things like the financial summary form need to be filled in incredibly carefully. Make sure that it's all dated properly, signed as well at the end. That's really important. Um, that is they put that a lot in refusal letters, and that will sometimes also be referring to the financial evidence as well. They can put that when they're saying, okay, we're not happy with the lump sum transactions and how they've been explained. So that's where it becomes super important that all of that is just very clearly articulated to them as to where the money's come from. But yeah, so I would say that's my main tip would be make sure finer details such as signatures and everything are just perfect. Make sure it's all been gone through with the student from the agent side of things as well, right before submissions, because we can look at it, we can say the finances are good, but the student needs to submit what we've told them to effectively. So at the point where right before the submission, the agent will also need to go through with the student and just make sure everything's in order, and just looks good from their side as well.
Sorry, I'm still
That's right, no problem.
just 1 second. If a student already has received 2 visa refusals from Ireland, is it still advisable to reapply for an Irish?
I'd say generally no, but it will depend on the nature of those visa refusals. Like without looking at the specific case, it can be hard to advise on more than that. But I would say if it's 2 visa refusals within a recent vicinity, so within like the past year or 2 years, and they're both for student visa applications, they've both been rejected. I would say I would not advise them to apply for a third time because it's highly likely they're going to get another refusal. Um, like very rare scenarios that might be a different answer depending on the nature of the refusals, but a lot of the time as well, if it's recent visa refusals, they will look at that as well, as to why.
Do we need to show living expenses for all 3 years for bachelors?
Okay, so for bachelors, so sort of like talked about before, so we'll just briefly go over that again. Immediate access needs to be so that's the first 10,000 euros for year one. Yes, no matter what, that needs to be shown on the bank statement. There's no way around that. For future years, so for let's say a bachelor's years 2 to 4, then not necessarily, but if they don't have it on the bank statement, they need to show where's that money going to come from. So normally it would be the income being high enough to show that they're going to have that money. So if it's a high enough income and they can go, look, every year I'm going to have this amount of money and that will be enough to cover the living costs as well as the course fees for all future years of this program. It can be from an asset sale. For example, let's say the most common one we see is like a house sale, and they go, this is my second or other property. I'm selling this property and it's worth this amount of money. This amount of money is enough to cover all the future years of the program. That is fine as well.
How
But
much of a study gap? Sorry.
That's all right, no problem. But yeah, I would say other than that, really, the main thing to just consider is make sure that it's just well documented how that money is going to be obtained in the future.
How much of a study gap needs explanation? For example, 1 to 2 years, etc.
I would say anything over 1 year. So less than 1 year, you can give a bit of just sort of like what they've been doing during this time. So it's a perfectly acceptable answer if it's been like, let's say, half a year since they've graduated, and they can just go, look, I've been looking at higher education options, and I've been like studying my English, etc. That's fine. If it's only been 6 months and they're going on to like a bachelor's, for example, that's not an issue. It becomes more of an issue where it's a situation, let's say like a year and over, where they just haven't got anything explained whatsoever. That is an issue. So yeah, that's where it gets really important to start explaining it. Is I would say anything over a year.
Do refusals outside of Europe have to be mentioned, like USA, Canada,
Absolutely.
or just within Europe?
So they say clearly it's any visa refusal. So yeah, it should be definitely mentioned any refusal. And disclosed to us as well. That needs to be sent over. Yeah.
How do you make a financial support from relatives strong?
Okay, so when we're talking about aunts and uncles, for example, what you'd want is, I would say, an accompanying letter being really clear as to why they are sponsoring the student and not the parent. So it needs to be sort of clearly explained reasoning given why not the parent, and if the reasoning is strong, they given. For example, let's say sadly the parent's not in the picture anymore for whatever reason, or it could be a different reason to that the parent's not able to just sponsor the student. That needs to be explained clearly and transparently, and then why the aunt and uncle is happy to be the sponsor, and then go on to sort of explain that they've got the actual capacity in the normal way, the same as for any other sponsor. So that's how you make it strong. Is the most important element is the why. Why are they sponsoring the student? And it needs to be really clearly explained.
On proof of funds, if the tuition fee is 15,000, I have a discount of 2,000. My fee balance is 13,000. I make a deposit payment of 5,000, so I need to prove balance of 8,000 plus the living costs of 10K. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you just subtract whatever's been paid, the course fees. So just a quick maths on my head there from what you're saying. Yeah, that sounds right. So it's just course fees, take away whatever's been paid, and then for the immediate access, it's just that plus living costs. In an ideal world as well, you'd want to have some more money on top of that to show the future years of the program. That would be good because it means there's less that you need to evidence later. So a good balance is if you've got a bit more in the account, it means there's less income that you need to show basically for where that money's going to come from in the future. So the more money, the better, but obviously will need to be explained very clearly as to where it's come from.
Is there a visa fee?
Yes, there will need to be a fee paid when the visa is actually like applied for and submitted. Off the top of my head, I'm very sorry, I can't remember exactly because it's not the stage the application I'll normally deal with. I'll normally deal a lot earlier on with actually just making sure the finances are ready and acceptable. But I'm sure if you look on the Irish Visa Authority website, the fee will be on there. But there is a fee for submitting the application.
Do you have a visa team to help during the visa process? Can the student use two bank statements to meet the financial requirements?
So we've the students to answer the first part of that. So we've got a team that will assess the financial evidence for the student. So if you've got any questions relating to their visa or anything to do with the application process, just send it over in an email to us at Visa Help. So what's really important to consider, they can use two bank statements, but it needs to cover the same time period. That's what's incredibly important. So it will need to be the same 6 months. But they absolutely can. I mean, we get situations where students will use sometimes like 5 or 6 bank statements. That's fine as long as the total amount shown. It needs to be in the sponsor's name or the student's name, whoever's sponsoring them, and needs to show the same 6 month period. As long as it does that, then it's absolutely fine. In fact, I would encourage if there's more than one bank statement that can be used that can show more money that's in the sponsor's name, that's great. Use them. Use as much. Don't limit yourself to just one if you can use more than one that has a good amount of money on it.
If the student makes a payment through an education loan and a balance amount remains, can that remaining loan amount be used to create the education bond, or do we need separate personal funds to create the education bond?
So I know what's being referred to as the educational bond, where if it's paid off to the Irish Visa Authority, that's like sort of discounted from the living costs that need to be shown. So that payment just needs to be evidence that it's been paid to the Irish Visa Authority. I believe it's only available for certain kinds of courses. So like bachelor's effectively is mainly what it's available for, and higher. So if it's a level below bachelor's, then you wouldn't be able to do that. But yeah, so what that will do is it's discounted off basically the living cost. So I believe it's a 10,000 euro educational bond. So you just take that off the living costs because you've paid it already directly to them, and it's been shown. So that's why.
Sorry, can families use business accounts or investment accounts?
Okay, so we've talked a bit about investments already, but with regards to business accounts, yes, they can. But what needs to be shown is that the sole proprietor of the account is the sponsor. That's what's really important. So there would need to be an account in the sponsor's name as well, but they can use a business account. That's not an issue, but it just needs to be shown that it is them that is the proprietor of the account. It wouldn't be taken very highly as evidence if it's evidence that multiple people can use that account, for example, and that the sponsor is not the sole person that's using it or can use it, then that's more of a problem. I think what's important there is it needs to be clear from the company side of things that they are going to be sponsoring the student for the studies with money out of this business account. That needs to be made extremely clearly, because what you don't want is the IRS Visa Authority looking at that bank statement and going, well, actually, how much of this is going to be taken um, out of the company and put towards the student's tuition. But yes, business accounts can be used, but you need to be evidenced well. And the most important element is that the sponsor is the only person using that account.
Is there an interview required for the visa process?
So it depends basically after submission if the Irish Visa Authority will ask for it or not. It's pretty rare from my experience that they do, but they can do this. Um, with regards to if we, from our side of things, will do our sort of mock compliance interviews with them in order to sort of give them background as to what the um, interview itself would be like. We only will do that in certain situations where we've got more questions regarding the student's profile. If we're not happy with elements of their finances, for example, then we may choose to ask the student to do an interview with us just to prepare them, because we think it's more likely that the Irish Visa Authority will ask for that interview with them.
Yes, we will be sharing all the slides and recording. I know some people have joined late, but just to let you know, there's a few questions in the chat about that. When a student gets a large fund deposit from his treasury bill interest from their bank, will that be considered? What are the chances for the student to get the visa if they've already had a refusal from other countries? Same person
Um,
asking.
so for the first part of that, so additional interest from bonds being considered. Yes, additional interest that's been given into the account can be, as long as it's actually been already paid in. Future interest that's going to be paid in for ready access in the future. Not necessarily as much, because obviously the value in the account can go up or down. If it goes down, then the amount of interest is going to be less. So that does need to be considered. But for immediate access, and if the interest has already been paid in, then that's fine. Sorry, can you remind me the second part of that question?
What are the chances for the student to get the visa if they've already had a refusal from another country?
So, of what the answer really is, it depends on the nature of the refusal. So if it's credibility related, then the probability is quite low that they'll get the visa. However, if it's more finance related, then there's more of a chance. It really just depends, though, as I said, on the gap between the refusal as well, like how long ago it was, what kind of visa was being applied for, all these different elements. But it is certainly possible that a student has had a previous visa refusal, can go ahead and get a visa with Ireland for a student visa. That is possible, but it just will depend on the nature of that refusal. If there's quite a few, multiple, then that's a lot more of a problem as well. But I would say also the time frame, so how long it's been. So let's say they applied for like a child visit visa when they were incredibly young, and then it's 10 years have elapsed and they're applying for this visa now. That's probably going to be less of a problem. But let's say if it's a visa that the student visa refusal they got a few months prior, then that could be more of an issue.
Coming up to the end of the time soon, so we'll try and get through as many questions as we can, and then I can try and address some others after that. But we don't think we'll get through all
Yep.
of the questions that are on here. Is there an alternative solution if the student sponsor does not file income tax returns in India?
So is there an alternative solution if they aren't, well, effectively they will need to show how much income the business is making. So that can be through, if they can't show that through income tax, then an independent audit, not a self audit, but I would say an independent audit, getting another company to do that is a really good solution there, because it will then just show exactly how much the company's making, and they'll weigh that quite highly as evidence. Self audit is also possible, but I would always say independent audit's a lot better, because they view that with more credibility, I would say, the outcome being given there. So that's just something to consider. Well, yeah, tax returns are also, I haven't actually gone over that much today in this session. That's also a great, if it can be provided, a great form of evidence to show as well just how much the income is for the business. But do not panic if that can't be provided. What can be provided is, like we've said already, alternative sources that can show exactly how much that business is making, like from an audit.
Just reading the last of the questions. I think you've gone over some of them already, Alistair. So,
It's all right.
Is there a medical insurance fee to pay along with a visa fee?
So yeah, there will be medical insurance does need to be sorted when the application is applied for. So I believe we do offer one through us that will be done as part of the application package when this is submitted. But the student is able to get, I believe, a separate one as well, if a different provider. But they will need to get medical insurance definitely before they submit the application. They will need to have that sorted.
Can you please confirm whether the student needs to pay 100% tuition fee before applying for visa? Is there any age gap for Ireland?
So they don't need to provide. They don't need to pay 100% of the 100% of the tuition fee before studies for all like 4 years of the bachelor. No, they don't. They will need to pay a large chunk of the initial course fees when they're talking about the immediate access requirements. But for the ready access requirements for the future, then they don't need to worry about that. No. What was the last part of that question? Sorry.
Was there an age gap? Any age gap for Ireland? I'm not sure what
I'm not sure what that question
I'm
is
not sure what
asking with
that
regards
is.
to age gap.
Age.
If it's
That's
talking
okay.
about, yeah, I was gonna say if it's talking about the age, the student between like their last full-time education and now, like I've sort of said already, to do a study gaps, it would need to be considered on kind of like a case by case basis.
Thanks, Alistair. We've come to the end of the time for the webinar now. What we'll do is provide some frequently asked questions based on the questions you put in the chat. So we'll try and address all of them. We'll send you the webinar slides and the recording tomorrow, so most of the questions will be answered, and then we'll put something together and also send that out to you based on the questions in the chat. Thanks, Alistair, for
Right. Brilliant.
webinar.
Thank you so
And
much.
thanks
Thanks, Laura.
everyone for joining. Thank
Yeah, thank you
you.
everyone for joining.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.